Good day. An important political trial is now pending in a European country with serious human rights implications, one which, to my mind, greatly overshadows the one of Alexei Navalny, which recently took place in Russia. After all, as I have discussed on numerous occasions, Navalny is not a significant political figure in Russia, and the cases that led to his recent trial are straightforward fraud cases involving a French company and a Russian timber company, for which Navalny received convictions in the local courts. This case is altogether far more serious because the individual who is due to be tried on high treason charges is no less than the leader of the largest opposition party in his country. I'm referring to Viktor Medvedchuk, who is the leader of the biggest opposition party in Ukraine, who has been arrested and placed under house arrest, and who is facing charges for high treason in Ukraine. Now, you might expect that in light of the fact that we are talking about one of Ukraine's most political leaders, a figure who is supported, as shown by elections, by millions of voters in Ukraine, that this trial of Medvedchuk, or rather this pending trial of Medvedchuk, would attract a great deal of international attention. You would expect, perhaps, that the champions of human rights would at least express concerns about this trial and would want to know what a treason trial of a prominent opposition politician in a European country was all about. They would want to satisfy themselves that this trial is a genuine trial on a real charge rather than what it frankly appears to be an attempt by the Ukrainian government, led by President Zelensky, to take out of contention a serious political rival. Well, if you expected all of that, you would be extremely disappointed because, to my knowledge, Western governments have been entirely silent about this affair. You will find no commentary about this anywhere in the Western media. You will not find any statement about it from any Western government. Amnesty International, of course, is not rushing to have Medvedchuk declared a prisoner of conscience. And though, as I said, Medvedchuk is indeed the leader of Ukraine's biggest opposition party, which, to reiterate, Navalny is not, Medvedchuk has received none of the attention and none of the interest that Navalny has. One country has, however, responded differently. But before I do that, I will just say something about the case against Medvedchuk. It's not entirely clear what exactly Medvedchuk is supposed to have done, but I would say this. It seems that as a politician, he's also a businessman, something which is practically coterminous in Ukraine. All Ukrainian politicians are business people to some extent, and that he has, as a businessman, traded with the Russians or with Russia to at least some extent, and possibly with Crimea also. This apparently justifies, or is said to justify, bringing charges against him for high treason. Now, millions of people in Ukraine visit Russia, despite the fact that the two countries are in conflict. Millions of people from Ukraine work in Russia, and it may come as a surprise to most viewers, but Ukrainian tourists are still the largest single group of tourists who visit Crimea and enjoy holidays there in any particular holiday season. Why Medvedchuk should be singled out for prosecution on high treason charges if the claim is that he has business interests in Russia, well, that might be difficult to justify legally. But of course, this is not a legal case in any meaningful sense, or so it seems to me. It is quite clearly a political case brought by Zelensky's government at a time when Zelensky is in serious political trouble in Ukraine following the failure of his attempt to pressure Russia in eastern Ukraine and by deploying vast numbers of Ukrainian troops there, and when it seems that negotiations between Ukraine and the various factions in eastern Ukraine to agree a ceasefire are going nowhere. It's also, of course, the case that Zelensky is finding that the support from the Western powers that he expected is a great deal less than resounding. And of course, he's recently been told by the United States, following the visit by US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Assistant Secretary Victoria Nuland, that the prospects of Ukraine joining NATO and the EU are for the time being non-existent, and that the United States is not going to come to Ukraine's rescue if it finds itself in a shooting war with Russia. So, faced with all of this, it seems to me that Zelensky has acted in the normal, typical way of a politician in trouble. He has lashed out against a political rival, in this case by bringing treason charges against him. I cannot see how any other charges against Medvedchuk can be made out, and frankly, to me, they look entirely political. By the way, the head of Ukraine's all-powerful Security Council Danilov has essentially confirmed that by saying that if Medvedchuk is indeed found guilty, then the Ukrainians would be happy to exchange him with Ukrainian figures who are in detention on various crimes in Russia. That in effect confirms that these charges which have been brought against Medvedchuk are purely political ones. But as I said, you will not find any discussion of this in the West. None of those Western newspapers that talk about Navalny, none of those newspapers that have condemned the prosecution of Navalny, none of those Western governments that have imposed sanctions on Russia over Navalny are saying anything about the far more blatantly political Medvedchuk prosecution. But as I said, one country has commented about this and has done so in a very strong way. And that, of course, predictably is Russia itself. And moreover, that comment was made by no less a person than Russia's President Vladimir Putin. Now, I ought to say that Putin is a personal friend of Medvedchuk. The two know each other well, and I understand that Putin is even the godfather of one of Medvedchuk's children, or that's what I've heard at least. If true, that would be a very close connection. In the Orthodox world, the position of a godfather matters much more than I think is the case in the West. So Putin has a personal reason to be angry about this, and he's gone out of his way to make comments about the prosecution against Medvedchuk and about the general drift of the situation in Ukraine itself. And he's done so in a very interesting and unusual way in the context of the meeting of Russia's Security Council. Now, I should explain that the Russian Security Council meets every week and is Russia's top decision-making body. It is not just concerned with security and foreign policy issues. It looks at the entire range of policy that the Russian leadership engages in, including such things as social policy and economic policy. It is essentially Russia's cabinet. And as I said, it meets every week, but its meetings are generally conducted in with a certain measure of secrecy. The Kremlin does routinely confirm when the meeting has taken place, and it does provide a very brief readout, but there is usually extremely little detail about what was said over the course of those meetings, because clearly a meeting of such an important body in Russia is normally treated as confidential. Well, on this occasion, the Russians went out of their way to make an exception of Putin's comments at this meeting about the trial, the prosecution that has been brought against Medvedchuk. In effect, the veil, if you like, of secrecy that usually surrounds Security Council meetings was briefly lifted in order to give a peek at what the Russians think about the Medvedchuk prosecution in the form of comments made about it by Putin himself. And I'm going to read out what those comments are. They appear on the Kremlin's website. So these are Putin's comments. I would like you to comment on the current developments in a neighboring state. These are I is Putin, you are the other senior officials of the Russian Security Council, in other words, the most powerful people in Russia. Putin is inviting them to say what they think about the situation in a neighboring state, the neighboring state being, of course, Ukraine. It appears, and this is highly regrettable, that Ukraine has been turned slowly but steadily into an antipode of Russia, an anti-Russia, a territory from which, judging by all appearances, we will never stop receiving news that needs to be given special attention in terms of protecting the national security of the Russian Federation. As you are aware, they are purging their political environment. They are banning national media outlets, and our Western partners have not batted an eyelid or have even supported these decisions. Some people have been accused selectively and for political reasons of maintaining economic ties with Russia, even though many others, including some members of the country's top political establishment, have been cooperating with Russia, including Crimea, for years, and this is regarded as normal. In other words, these clearly politically laden and selective decisions have one goal: to cleanse the political environment of the forces that call for a peaceful settlement of the crisis in southeastern Ukraine, Donbass, and for good neighbourly relations with Russia. This is definitely an issue we must never lose sight of, an issue to which we must respond promptly and with due regard for the threats that are being created for us. As I have already mentioned, members of the opposition are being accused of cooperation with Russia, including in the economy, while members of the authorities have been doing the same for years. Our trade last year amounted to $9.9 billion. I cannot imagine that, if such matters are dealt with objectively, everyone who works with Russia will be charged with criminal offences in Ukraine. So, we see extremely strong comments here. Now, Putin is careful not to mention Medvedchuk by name, but that is whom he's clearly referring to. And he's talking about Ukraine taking steps in the context of its political crisis and its confrontation with Russia to purge within Ukraine all politicians and political forces that speak out for a rapprochement with Russia. He also points out, as I have done, about the total silence that these repressive steps, blatantly repressive steps, have received in the West, where indeed, if anything, they are generally supported. Our Western partners have not batted an eyelid or have even supported these decisions, in Putin's words. And Putin has gone on to say that what Medvedchuk is being accused of doing, which is conducting economic activities with Russia, trading with Russia, is something which is no different from what the Ukrainians or members of the Ukrainian leadership are themselves doing. And he says that these attempts to purge Ukraine of all politicians and political leaders who support Russia, or at least who support a rapprochement with Russia, are a threat to Russia, that they are an attempt to turn Ukraine into a country that is entirely hostile to Russia, and that they are a threat to Russia's national security. But then there were those points which I think are the most serious of all, and which point to what may be coming. As I have already mentioned, members of the opposition are being accused of cooperation with Russia, including in the economy, whilst members of the authorities have been doing the same for years. Our trade last year amounted to $9.9 billion. I cannot imagine that, if such matters are dealt with objectively, everyone who works with Russia will be charged with criminal offences in Ukraine. So what he's saying is that it is inconceivable that Ukraine will bring charges against everybody who trades with Russia, because doing so would involve people who are important people in Ukraine's top leadership. And he says too that this is definitely an issue we must never lose sight of, an issue to which we must respond promptly and with due regard for the threats that are being created for us. Now, what does he mean? I am going to make a guess that we're going to see over the next few weeks and months a cascade of Russian sanctions against Ukrainian political leaders who are conducting business activities in Russia. In effect, those people are going to find that they're not going to be able to conduct business with Russia any longer. If Medvechuk is going to be charged with high treason for conducting business with Russia, then Ukrainian politicians, parts of the political leadership who conduct business with Russia and who make profits from doing so, are going to find that brought to a stop in response. This is not, I think, something that the Russians intended to do, but that is the way it's going. Now, amongst the people who are probably going to be included in this list are people like Igor Kolomoisky, who is a Ukrainian oligarch who was up to now and up to recently Zelensky's principal political champion, and of whom Zelensky was once largely seen as a protege. I suspect that other Ukrainian oligarchs are going to find themselves in the same position. This comes after the visit to Ukraine by Assistant Secretary Victoria Nuland and US Secretary of State Tony Blinken, in which apparently they told Zelensky that as part of anti-corruption measures, they wanted to see action taken across the board, against all Ukrainian oligarchs, people not just like Kolomoisky, but people like Rinat Akhmetov and other Ukrainian business leaders who wield an extraordinary amount of political influence in Ukraine itself. It seems to me that what's going to happen over the next few weeks is that these two people are going to find themselves in a double bind. They're coming under pressure from the United States, and they're going to come under pressure from Russia too. The United States wants to see these people pushed out of their leading positions in the Ukrainian economy so that the United States can essentially take over, or at least its protégés can. These people, these business people, these oligarchs are now going to find themselves under identical pressure from Russia because, as far as the Russians are concerned, they are doing the same things, trading with Russia, as Medvedchuk, Viktor Medvedchuk, has done and has been accused of high treason for. These people, these oligarchs, were the people who originally bankrolled the Maidan movement that overthrew the previous president, Viktor Yanukovych, and which brought the present US-backed Maidan movement to power in Ukraine. They're now finding that by doing that, they're coming under pressure from both sides. They are seeing, in other words, the consequences of the step they took. I suspect that behind the scenes, the Russians are talking to all these people, and they're telling them this: if you want to continue along the path that you are going, then forget about your business in Russia, your business deals in Russia. Forget also about your business deals in Ukraine itself, because frankly, you have lost all friends, both in Russia and in the West, who you once had. If you want to survive in some form, then you must change course. And that means facing down not just the Americans, who are clearly hostile to you, but this very same nationalist movement, which you have yourselves spawned within Ukraine itself, and which has brought our relations to the point of crisis. A trade turnover between Russia and Ukraine of $9.9 billion is insignificant for Russia. And if the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is completed in September, as it looks increasingly likely that it will be, from that moment on, Ukraine's importance economically to Russia will have gone. For a country like Ukraine, and for the business leaders who have dominated it, that trade with Russia is indispensable. That is the reality they now face. They could very well find that all their business in Russia is gone, and that Ukraine's own trade with Russia is, in effect, coming to an end at precisely that moment when the United States appears to be turning against them. These people, unpleasant though they are, now it seems to me, have some very difficult decisions to make. Thank you for joining me for this program. I look forward to you joining me in future programs, both on this channel and on our other channel, our main channel, The Duran, where I do programs with my colleague and friend, Alex Christoforou. Please also check us out on our main channel, The Duran, and also please check us out on our other platforms, SuperTube, Odyssey, and Locals. You'll find links for all of these channels and platforms under this video. Please also check us out, or rather support us to the extent that you can via PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribestar. We accept donations, by the way, in all currencies, including the new electronic ones. I appreciate that this may be a lot to ask in these hard times, but we are very grateful to you for whatever money you feel you can spare if you want to support us that way. And it's fine, by the way, if you can't, but please, in that case, remember to check your subscription to this channel and also to our main channel. And also, please press that like button as well. And also, don't forget to check out our Discord server and come to our shop and see the wonderful things we have there. Our wonderful magic mugs, our t-shirts, our sweatshirts, our hoodies, our hats, and all the rest. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to you joining me in future videos on this channel. And thank you for joining me today. And I look forward to you joining me soon, and have a wonderful day until then.